It's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion this evening, to what's going to be, I think, a very interesting and a very important discussion. I only have two administrative announcements that I want to make. The first is I want to thank all of our sponsors, Rabbinical Assembly, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, Holy Blossom Temple, the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, and of course here, Kehilat Beth Israel of Ottawa, your electronic hosts for the evening. So that's administrative announcement number one. The second administrative announcement is this. As audience members, we encourage you to ask questions. Because this is in a webinar format, you'll be able to pose your questions electronically. And to do that, you want to press on the Q&A button, which you'll find typically it's at the bottom of the screen, but various Zoom setups are different. And you'll be able then to submit a question. You can direct it to a specific speaker if you like, or to all of the speakers. Rabbi Friedman Cole, who's our rabbi in residence, is our moderator for this evening. He'll be posing questions of his own or that have been submitted in advance to the panelists, and he'll also be glad to pose your questions. He'll be monitoring, as we'll all be monitoring, the Q&A tab to see which questions have been posed. It's possible we won't have time for all of the questions. If so, I apologize in advance, but on the other hand, that will be in some ways a good sign. We're going to get started now with the prayers that have been customary in synagogues really around the world since October 7th. We'll have the prayer for Israel, the prayer for the hostages, and prayer for IDF soldiers. So that'll all get started in just a moment.
If you want to stand for the tefillot, you may, the Omer, and it is Yom HaAtzmaut, celebrated in Israel until just a few hours and still celebrated in the diaspora, depending on our time zone. We're a little slow on the Avinu Shebashamayim, the tefillah for the state of Israel. I'm going to recite it in English and in Hebrew, and we're hopefully, maybe it'll come on. Avinu Shebashamayim, rock and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel with its promise of redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our Holy Land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace, and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'goalo, barech et Medinat Yisrael, reshit tzmichat geulatenu. Hagen alea be'avrat chasdecha, ufros alea sukat shlomecha, ushelach orcha v'amitcha, l'rashea sareha v'yotzea, v'taknem be'etzah tova milfanecha. Chazek et yidei migine eretz kodshenu, v'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, v'ateret nitzachon teatrem, v'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam liyoshveha, v'nomar, Amen. For the captives. Achenu kol beit hanutunim b'tzara u'v'shivya, ha'omdim ben bayam u'ven bayabasha, ha'makom yirachem aleihem, v'yotzeim mitzara l'revacha, u'me'afela li'ora, u'mish'ubud l'gula, hashta ba'agala u'v'zman kariv, v'nomar, Amen. And a prayer for the welfare of the Chayalim. Misha berach avotenu Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, hu yivarech et Chayalot v'Chayalei tzva hagana liYisrael, v'anshei kochot habitachon, ha'omdim al mishmar artzenu v'yarei Eloheinu, migvul ha'lebanon v'ad midbar Mitzrayim, u'min hayam hagadol ad levo ha'arava, u'b'chol makom shehem, v'yabasha ba'avir u'bayam. May the Holy One protect these soldiers and save them from trouble and distress, from danger and illness. May God give them wisdom, insight, and understanding, so that they not destroy the innocent with the wicked. May the Holy One send blessing and success to their difficult mission, granting them salvation and victory to fulfill the words of Torah Ki Adonai Elohechem haholech imachem, lehilachem lachem imoivechem, lehoshia etchem. The eternal your God goes with you to battle your enemies and to save you. V'nomar Amen. Thank you for joining us. A reminder as well, again, questions should be submitted to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Rabbi Amiel Hirsch wrote in the Sapir Journal, October 7, 2023, forever changed Jewish history. The cataclysm is so profound that it will take years to fully understand. Time froze. It is still October 7. We have not yet moved on. Our anguish is too raw, our fear and uncertainty too pervasive. We are still traumatized, unable to truly begin a healing process until the most intense fighting ceases and the danger is lifted. Commissions of inquiry have yet to be established, but they will be, and the political and military reckoning is sure to come. It will be a deeply painful process, but there can be no healing without painstaking investigation and genuine accountability. These will roil Israelis as well as world Jewry, including American Jews. I want to say that on October 7, my young cousin, 19-year-old Eden Levi Alon, was killed defending her base, buried the next day, and during the Shiva, which was attended by many high level of Israeli security and army because of the position of Eden's parents, her uncle said to me, look around this room. Shamenet haaretz, this is the best of the land. And they cannot explain what happened. They cannot explain what happened. So we've gathered you together. Hopefully, you will be able to help us and those who are tuning in. What changed for Jews on Shmini Atzeret, October 7, Simchat Torah? Did synagogues and Jewish organizations prepare Jewish communities for what has unfolded since the Hamas attacks? What can and should be done looking to the future? Ami, would you be the first to respond, please?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. And we talked about maybe coming up to Canada personally. It didn't actually physically, it didn't work out, but this is the next best thing. And I appreciate your reaching out to me. What I just kind of in summary, what I to summarize what I said in that article, I think my personal belief is that even a century from now, we'll look back at this period as historically consequential in Judaism. I believe we'll remember it, we'll mark it ritually. It'll take upon itself theological ramifications. Books, not only history books, but theological books will be written about it. And we're not even in the middle of this process. We're at the very, very beginning of the process. And it, in my view, is so consequential that it's hard to predict in what direction the winds of history will take us. And it would be very, very interesting to look back 20 years from now and see the impact and the influence of these very days. These days, I say this is only at the very beginning because, as you read from my article, we're still in October 7th or October 8th at the latest, because until the fighting dies down, until the day after begins to become clarified, until political accountability happens in Israel, until all of the social changes that are hard to predict in Israel occur, until recovery begins in Israel, it's hard to see how world Jewry can recover as well. In other words, our emergence from our trauma is dependent on events in Israel, and they are not close to recovering from trauma yet. I should add, of course, at the very core of this is their return of the hostages. Until that is resolved, hopefully with their restoration alive, but for those who are no longer alive, that their bodies are returned and buried. It's hard to see how Israel can recover, and therefore it's hard to see how world Jewry can begin to move into the next phase. I would say just very briefly, and I'd be very happy to elaborate on this in the course of the conversation, some major fundamental assumptions and conceptions that we had about Israel collapsed on October 7th. And I cited three in the article. The first was went to the very heart of what Zionism meant for Israelis, but also for world Jewry. That is, it's not as if the Zionists guaranteed that Zionism was the solution to anti-Semitism and the creation of a Jewish state would never again put Jews in danger. But what the state of Israel did guarantee was that pogroms wouldn't happen in the state of Israel. And what we saw on October 7th was not a Holocaust, but it was a pogrom in every way inside the borders, where the state was fundamentally absent for most of the day. And that shook our sense of confidence that these days were over, that the state of Israel, whatever you felt about its policies, it was going to guarantee that Jews could live in peace, and if necessary, we would defend ourselves by ourselves. And that concept collapsed in Israel. It created a crisis at the core of the national existence in Israel. And it affects us as well, because we kind of assumed now in 2020, at the time, 2023, that Israel was beyond existential threats, and that, it was high tech, it was a modern economy, and we could rely on high tech weaponry and defense systems to protect Israel, and all of that collapsed. Very briefly, the second concept that collapsed here in the diaspora, mostly for us, was it's not that we didn't know that anti-Semitism was still bubbling under the surface. And I speak here as an American. I don't know what is the situation in Canada to the detail that you do. Maybe some of it overlaps. Maybe some of it is consequentially different. But here in America, we felt that while we were, of course, aware that anti-Semitism is a permanent struggle for us, we had no idea that it would erupt in this fashion. Jeremy, I think you need to mute over there on the other end there. There you go. We had no idea that it would erupt in this fashion, and the nexus between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism became much, much clearer. So that, while you could have a theoretical debate in a classroom whether at all times anti-Zionism constituted anti-Semitism, what we saw was not only Jew hatred for the sake of Jew hatred, but Jew hatred under the guise of anti-Zionism, which either started out that way or very quickly led to anti-Semitism. And then the third crisis, which we're going to be dealing with for years, is the crisis of liberalism itself. We put our trust and our security here in the United States in the liberal order. The liberal order for us meant we judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. We value merit. We believe in reason. We believe in debate. We believe in free speech. all of which have come under a cloud preceding October 7th, of course, but has been brought out in a very dramatic way since October 7th. And that affects our generation, our at least Gen Z, where we are constantly hearing, I'm assuming the congregational rabbis here are experiencing some similar things, but we're constantly experiencing, even on a personal level, parents who are coming in and telling us they find it difficult to speak with their kids because their kids are part of the protests against Israel. And so there's a real generational crisis, which kind of happens, naturally in any case in terms of, the expectations of generations. But in our case now, with respect to what do we understand and mean by liberalism, and on what values do we want to educate the younger generations in Judaism, I feel October 7th has exposed this crisis in a very dramatic way, and we're likely to be challenged by it for years to come. Unmute. You have to unmute, Baruch.
I neglected to introduce Rabbi Amiel Hirsch, and I want to thank you. He's the senior rabbi of the Stephen Weiss Free Synagogue in New York, and really one of the major figures articulate both in the New York area and in the Reform movement and in the Zionist movement. Our next speaker is going to be Rabbi Yael Splansky. Rabbi Splansky, who's a fourth-generation Reform rabbi, is the senior rabbi at Holy Blossom Synagogue in Temple in Toronto. She's been one of the rabbis there for 25 years, and Mazal Tov. And she's a Hartman Fellow, a Hartman Rabbinic Fellow, and on the Rabbinic Council of HUC-JIR, and a former president of the Toronto Board of Rabbis. Yael, would you address some of those same questions, please?
Yes, thank you. First, I do want to thank you for this invitation to be with you and your congregation in Ottawa tonight. And I want everyone at Beth Israel to know just how lucky they are to have Rabbi Friedman Cole as their rabbi now. We miss him in Toronto. He's always been a good friend with lots of encouragement and support over many years here when he was just down the street from us. And while I have many rabbinic role models in my life, he is certainly one of them. I've learned much from you.
Thank you.
So yes, I don't want to repeat any of the important things that Rabbi Hirsch said. I will agree with some of them and then maybe highlight a couple of additional points. So one is I agree that the very promise of Zionism has been challenged and changed. On October 9th, when I finally reached a cousin of mine in Israel, of my parents' generation, she said, everyone is comparing this to the Yom Kippur War, but I remember the Yom Kippur War. And she said, then we had a government and we had an army. Today we have neither. Because the promise of a Jewish state was that the government and the army would be there to protect its people, both its citizens and its inhabitants. And so in that way, the very promise of Zionism has been challenged and changed. Pogroms like this were supposed to be only in Galut, only in the diaspora. Another thing that my cousin said that stuck with me from that early conversation was she said, we thought we knew this enemy. We did not know this enemy, she said. And this cousin of mine is significantly left-leaning, has been for decades and even generations in Israel. And I think what she meant then has only shown itself to be truer and truer since then. And that is that many, if not most, have shifted to the right of where we were on October 6th. My Israeli friends in the peace camp, activists, have said in early days, they were saying, for the sake of peace and for the sake of the Palestinians and for the sake of Israelis, Hamas must be disempowered. And so I took my cues from them when speaking to friends here who are left-leaning and not knowing what to make of this story. It became very clear. My husband, at the Seder this year, when my father or father-in-law leading the Seder said, you know, raising the cup, and now we lean to the left and drink, my husband said, maybe not as far left leaning as last year, you know. So I imagine many people have felt this in their own circles. I would also join in the conversation about how do we place October 7th on the map of Jewish history? And this has been a struggle for me personally, I would say, since the early days. I was resisting believing that this was a major shift requiring everything to be reconsidered and reorganized. I wanted to believe that this was just another hard thing that we and Israelis were going to rise above and get past, like Intifada, like the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, like the Pittsburgh Tree of Life shooting, right? We've had our share even in recent memory. And I pretty early came to say in a sermon that while grappling with the question, it is becoming clearer and clearer that, yes, I agree with Rabbi Hirsch that this is a moment that requires shifts and reassignments and realignments on so many levels that we will forever see Jewish life as pre and post October 7th. So a bit of a nechemta, I'll just say quickly, because I know Rabbi Friedman-Cole also wants to bring some hopeful messages. I will add that there is a kind of Jewish renaissance, right? Whenever there is pressure, there is also a creative response. And we're seeing that in many Jewish corners: poetry, music, journalism, film, and so on, academics, archives, and so on. So that I see as very exciting and should be celebrated and supported. I know we'll get into it a little bit more soon enough about synagogue life in particular, but I do want to say that there are some positive ripple effects where we see in many ways how people are now leaning into their Judaism, leaning into their Zionism. Synagogue membership is up, synagogue attendance is up, teen participation is up, conversions are up. That might be surprising for some people to know, but it's true. Jewish leadership and volunteerism is up. And the giving patterns, while they're changing and we need to track that and consider how to plan accordingly, there is something, Jewish generosity is up, and our own relationships with local Israelis is growing significantly, and that's a new story for us that I'm very proud to share.
Thank you very, very much. Early in this, I met with the Israeli ambassador to Canada, who was having a round table of rabbis. And I and the modern Orthodox rabbi commented about the uptick in individuals seeking conversion. And I know that that's a phenomenon that other colleagues have spoken about. There's a sense that if you were considering something, I want to throw my hat in, I want to be part of this group, which is noble and honorable. Rabbi Jacob Blumenthal, a former congregational rabbi, now is the CEO of both the Rabbinical Assembly, our international organization of conservative rabbis, and the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the organization of conservative synagogues. And so he has a bridging role that he plays very creatively and very astutely as a fine and level-headed leader. What are you seeing in relationship to the question that I had raised as well?
Thank you, and thanks you for including me among this wonderful panel. It's certainly provoked me to do some reflection that I have to say I haven't made the time to do. So I thank you for the opportunity for just personally to be able to do that, as well as perhaps share a few thoughts. And maybe I'll begin with just some thinking a little bit about how I feel personally in this moment. The first begins with, I think, a sense of vulnerability. And I think it relates back, Yael, to what you talked about, the sense that one of the first things we heard from Israel is the IDF disappeared. It wasn't there. It's as if we were without a state. And those statements are so powerful. And they, I think, at least for me, induced a new level of vulnerability as a Jewish person, coupled with the anti-Semitism that we're now feeling outside of the state of Israel, that at least in my generation, I haven't felt in this way. I've certainly encountered anti-Semitism. We know that Israel has faced wars in the past, but this kind of sense of vulnerability as a Jew is certainly not unique to our generation, but it's unique to our experience as a generation. And it also is coupled with resilience and the ability, both in my own way, and I think what we see among Israelis and among many in our own communities, to also be able to respond and to find new ways of being and living, even with that space of vulnerability. And I would also, one of the things that I'm wondering about is how that vulnerability also invokes humility and curiosity, and whether it could create over time a sense of openness when we've moved past October 8th, God willing, soon. A second piece that I'm really feeling is a sense of grief. And I don't feel like we've finished working through the various stages of grief. And of course, we now know that those stages of grief don't happen sequentially. They happen in different orders, sometimes simultaneously. But we are feeling a lot of those pieces. I often still feel in denial of how the world has changed. It's hard for me to even, as I do my day-to-day work, break out of that and actually try to think about that. And I think some of that is a sense of denial in my own space. I think about the shock and re-traumatization that many of us feel, at least that I feel, as I re-encounter stories about the hostages, or as I encounter each morning the soldiers who have fallen in the previous 24 hours. These are things that keep us from being able to move fully past that grief. And it makes it even harder to really think about what could come next. And it leads to, I think, a sense of paralysis that is very worrying, especially in Israel, as to maintain alliances. The world, and especially the United States, I think, the Biden administration is pushing Israel towards trying to think about what comes next. And I find that when I speak with Israelis, they're not ready for that conversation. Not just the leadership, but actually the Israelis that I speak with. They are still in this space of grief and trauma, and it's very hard to think about that, even as there are probably good reasons to demand it. And is there a space for leadership to be able to provide some of that thinking when the Israeli government is not stepping up to do that? A third is a desire for connection. And Yael, you talked about it in terms of what we're seeing in our synagogue spaces, on our hillels, on campuses, and so many among the organizations that work with our young adults. We're seeing tremendous interest in that connection. We also see it through the over $1 billion that Jewish communities around the world have raised and directed towards Israel. We're seeing it in the ways on social media that people are connecting, and through the seeking out of knowledge online. So there are it's frustrating to see that it takes such a terrible experience to push people towards seeking Jewish experience and connection, but at the same time, it does provide an opportunity. And the last piece that I think we're really thinking about is there was this beautiful reaction after October 7th of unity and a real sense of Jewish peoplehood. And we are now seeing that it's not completely unexpected, but I think we're seeing that now being challenged, that some of that unity turned out to be conformity. And as we start to ask really hard questions, and as we create the mind space to ask those hard questions, or as either Israeli policy or American government policy or other kinds of things, push us towards having to think through things, that unity is somewhat challenged, because there are really hard questions. Do we prioritize rescuing hostages or defeating Hamas? Maybe there's a way to do both, but if not, then really wonderful people can differ on what that strategy looks like and what those priorities are. Just some others that my colleagues didn't mention. I really wonder about our relationship to power, and what it means that the world doesn't like the fact that Jews have power, and what does it mean when our power fails? Ami, I think you put it beautifully in your article. What does it mean when Zionism was about returning the Jewish people to history, and to the stage of history, and in fact, it doesn't protect us. I also see a real question about who are our allies and our friends. Those friendships have been tested, and sometimes we see real beauty in the ways people have come to help us personally and sort of organizationally and as a people. And in other times, alliances and friendships that we really took for granted or really worked hard to create have failed us. And there's a lot of pain. I hear a lot of pain around that. And by the way, I hear that also even from my own kids as they look at spaces in their social media and online world that they relate to that feel like they've turned on them. They're no longer communities and friendships that they can be a part of. So, many other questions, of course, but mostly this has been a tremendously emotional time. I feel like my emotions are swimming every day. And I see that in the people that I work with, and I hear it from the leaders and rabbis who are working in our communities.
Thank you. I want to turn to synagogues in particular. We were all experiencing over the last number of years already the need for increased security in our congregations. The government of Canada and of the United States has also seen that and has been very helpful. When we have interfaith activities in Christian congregations and parishes in their churches, they don't have to have that kind of security that we do. How has the Israeli response to Hamas, which was a war, how has that come and affected us here? How has it affected children and their parents? About how has that affected university students, young people who have become almost, in some cases, if not partially, fully anti-Zionist? Is there more reflection going on in people's homes? Are young people asking more questions? Are they organizing themselves differently? I'll let Yael go first because she went second the last time, and then we'll go to Rabbi Blumenthal and then back to you, Rabbi Hirsch.
Okay, so I'll start with an anecdote. There's a young mom in our congregation who didn't come around much at all. She sort of inherited her attachment to Holy Blossom, and she has little kids, and she never had them enrolled in our school until this year. And when October 7th struck, she was very nervous about bringing her children to the synagogue. And she felt that it would be unsafe and it would make her children into targets of some sort. But she swallowed hard and she brought them, and she steeled herself and tried not to show any fear. She said after a couple of weeks, this became her safe space, that she actually felt more safe in the synagogue than anywhere else, not at her children's public school, where things were simmering, not in her workplace where things were simmering. And it was a total inverse. It was an inverted experience for her. And she says, now this is my safe place. This is my happy place for me and for my children. So I share that with you because while some things did change in terms of how we do security, and we've been very lucky in our city and in our neighborhood with a very significant police presence, we have changed a few of our protocols, added a little more hardware and so on. But the truth is, we've spent more time and attention on how to help people feel safe. And I know everyone listening will understand when I say there's a difference between being safe and feeling safe. And it's like a Venn diagram, right? We've actually been spending a lot of time and energy focusing on how to help people to feel safe. And in that way, I would say, Judaism has the goods. We have the tools to rely upon for spiritual, emotional stability through prayer, through study, through Torah, through relationships. And synagogues have shown themselves first during the pandemic, and now again since October 7th, synagogues have shown themselves to be very nimble, very creative, and with all kinds of systems and structures in place and leadership of all kinds in place to respond to the moment. And I think we saw that again and again since October 7th. And, sometimes synagogues are accused of being stiff and sluggish, but I really think it's just the opposite. And synagogues of all sizes and all stripes have shown themselves to be very responsive and quite nimble.
First of all, agree on all. I'll just mention that this past Shabbat, one of the more powerful experiences I've had recently, since now I'm a Jew in the pew, and I just get to listen to B'nai Mitzvah students with their do their Divrei Torah that I haven't seen before, which is kind of a nice thing. And this lovely Bar Mitzvah student this past week talked about, it was reflecting on the Torah portion, and it led to conversation that he had with our rabbis here about his own Jewish identity and his desire, his decision to wear a Jewish star in school, to get a Magen David and wear it publicly in school. And it was very powerful, both because that we should have to ask and struggle with it, and also his own sense of resilience and pride that had been built through his education and his experiences. And I think, what we have to, and I extrapolate that across thousands of B'nai Mitzvah every year, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people in our own spaces who are being nurtured in that way. I also think that anti-Semitism creates a tax, and that tax is security and the cost of security. When we think about the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars that the Jewish community is spending collectively on security, that is not being spent on education, on immersive experiences, on social justice work, on developing new liturgy. I mean, it is a tremendous tax. That tax has been with us for a long time, but especially since Tree of Life. So I don't think that, there are some ways in which we are now feeling this more intensively, but I don't think that but I agree with Rabbi Splansky that this is not necessarily a new phenomenon. It is somewhat more intensified, and it's just caused a need to review what we do. And I also would just, since I wear two hats, both I wear a kippah as in my work with the United Synagogue and my kippah with the Rabbinical Assembly, I would say that throughout our systems, especially in our congregations, not only are we responding with programs and opportunities for our communities to come together, but our rabbis and clergy are spending a lot of time talking with people, counseling. The number of people who simply walk into the synagogue building and say, this happened to me at school, this happened to my child at college. And just the hours that our clergy, our cantors, our rabbis, our educators are spending in personal counseling is tremendous. and also wearying. So my other plea to those who are listening live or who might hear this recorded is to be kind to your clergy, your rabbis, your educators, your synagogue professionals, your lay leaders who are, just so invested and are giving their all. It has now been 221 days of intense 24/7, not even 24/6, but 24/7 work, and help them find time over the summer to take a break. Even if they say they don't believe they can actually leave their communities, they must take a break. It's like putting on the oxygen mask on the plane. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. So that would just be my plea for the evening. Baruch, you are on mute.
Sorry, what are you seeing in New York, in your community, about how people are reacting? And also, since you are not very far from Columbia, what are you seeing in terms of university campuses in the Northeast?
So first of all, Rabbi Friedman Cole, I resonate very much with what you said about churches and the lack of security there. I'm part of a monthly interfaith group, and we used to meet. This was pre-October 7th, once a month at the church, and I was constantly amazed at how you could just walk in. There was no security, no nothing. And I never really figured out, there have been violence against churches too, as I think everybody knows. And I never really figured out whether that was just, Jews are internalizing the threat more, and the Christian community really should be spending more resources on security, or whether, they were right and they weren't really a target. But I did notice that it's just walking into churches right in the center of town, Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, right in the center of town. Whereas if I compare what we're spending now on security in every way, personnel, financial resources, focus and concentration, even versus 10 years ago, it's day and night. And I resonate with what Rabbi Blumenthal said. It's money that otherwise would and could be spent on the stuff that really we're dedicated to, which is Jewish education and Jewish continuity. I think, first of all, I agree with everything that my colleagues just said. We are seeing, alongside some troubling polarization that's occurring in the Jewish community, we are seeing a resurgence of Jewish exploration amongst people who have not had that at all or in years. And it is precipitated by October 7th, and there's this kind of reassessment and reevaluation. I had somebody in my office today, not a member, had never been a member, and he wanted to talk to me. Had heard some things that I had said and had come once or twice to synagogue. Older man in his mid-60s, we talked, and I explained some of the things that he might think of doing, including coming with me to Israel on our next mission. He began to cry. He had never been to Israel. He told me he had never been to Israel. He said, when I get to Israel, and then he started to burst out in tears. And he said, I know what's going to happen to me. I'm going to stop, kiss the ground before I move into the rest of the airport. So we are seeing that. I'll say this just to maybe add a dimension to what my colleagues said. I see three groups of American Jews. I see it. The first group is a small group. It's a minority, even a small minority. It's probably 10 to 15% of American Jewry that is anti-Zionist. Some of the younger generations, they joined protests against Israel. The challenging part is the younger you go, the higher those percentages are. In totality, I think there are probably no more. I haven't checked this empirically, but others have, and I've seen some surveys. It's probably no more than 15, maybe 20% tops. I believe, and I say this sadly, and for me, I'm open to any Jew who wants to walk into the synagogue, irrespective of what they believe. But I believe that many of them, if not most of them, in particular the younger ones, are lost to us for the time being. I don't know, I was once a student too, and there are a lot of things that I believed then that I don't believe now. And this was before I had a mortgage and kids and established. So it's hard to say what might happen, say, a generation from now, 20 years from now. But for the foreseeable future, I believe that group is largely lost to us because part of their critique is against the Jewish establishment. It is against the Jewish community. Part of their critique against us is that we have abandoned the very principles that they understood having been taught by us, and that they look at Israel as in very unflattering ways. I think it's hard to see how many of those people will come back to us for the foreseeable future. That leaves everybody else, and everybody else wants to be supportive not only of the Jewish community but of Israel. Many of them see Israel as an important part of their own Jewish identity. Within that group, however, there is a third group that I think is becoming more and more obvious, and that is, Rabbi Blumenthal referred to this in passing. While there was a general consensus for the first few months and a rallying around the wagon, I think that in that group that is part of us and that is wants to be supportive and considers themselves supportive of Israel, some of them who openly say they're Zionists, there's a growing discomfort with the way the war is being prosecuted. And there is a growing discomfort at the humanitarian consequences on the Palestinian population. And they are asking many questions, and they're uncertain about where the future is going. I mean, on a basic level, I think that's a positive phenomenon, but it, in the context of such passionate emotions and polarization, it is complicating for congregational rabbis and for leaders in the Jewish community to try and maintain the consensus among the 80% of the people who are essentially in the pro-Israel Zionist camp. So the future of our part of the community also rests a lot with how long it's going to take to wrap up the most intense fighting phase of the war. And I would say that that group is where, in my view, since we have limited amounts of time in our community, and I don't want to necessarily extend this to other people who are making other decisions with other populations, but for me, we don't have the time or the resources to reach people who I think are largely gone to us. Although, if they walked into the synagogue, I would embrace them with open doors, open arms, and an open heart. We don't ask people what they believe when they want to be part of the synagogue or join the synagogue. And I would love nothing more for that kind of critic to come and give me a piece of their mind and explain to me why they think we're wrong and I'm wrong, and give me an opportunity to see where we might be able to meet in the middle. But in terms of the resources, time that it's available to us, personnel that's available to us, financial resources, we need to, as a community, I think, focus our attention on the ones who are not lost. And it is definitely not too late for the generation younger than Gen Z. All of these kids in preschool, middle school, even high school, who are coming through our gates. And we need, in my view, to reorient our thinking, reorient how we see Jewish education. Where did we go wrong with certain young people who emerged from our institutions? And part of what they're saying in terms of their critique is, you betrayed the very values that you ostensibly conveyed to us. So we need to ourselves step back and ask ourselves where we may have gone wrong, what we will do in the future, what is missing in terms of the Jewish identity of these young people who have gone to the anti-Zionist camp. Again, not the critical of Israeli government camp, which is blessed and legitimate, but the other side, and reevaluate what it is. What are the basic core Jewish values that we want to convey to the younger generation? I would add one more thing, and maybe we can continue this later in the conversation if we have time. I just interviewed for my podcast, it's called In These Times, the lead professor at Columbia University who really first began drawing attention to what was happening there post-October 7th, Professor Shai Davidai, if those of you have heard of him, and one of the unbelievable student leaders, young Jewish leaders on campus, a woman named Noah Fay. And we have some amazing people in that younger group of budding Jewish leaders. And those are the people we really need to cultivate, ask ourselves, why did they turn out that way? And then see how we can apply that to the younger generations coming through.
Thank you. I'm going to use that as a segue, because we're also not only dealing with in our own community, we are clearly dealing with an upsurge of anti-Semitism. I was at a meeting with Deborah Lyons and Deborah from the United States, the two Deborahs who are
Lipstadt.
Thank you, who are anti-Semitism envoys. And they said, anti-Semitism is a national security issue. It's not simply an issue related to Jews. It's an effort to destabilize democracy. That's coming from the outside, but we're also seeing it expressed internally. People who just say things, and certainly people who do things. How can we help our people who grew up thinking that was diminishing? How do we help them not to panic, but also have enough resilience and strength to respond to that? Jacob, would you address that first, and then we'll go to Yael and to Rabbi Hirsch?
Sure, because it's such an easy answer. But look, and I think Rabbi Hirsch sort of, I think, did a wonderful job introducing this, in that, and maybe I'll share it from a different perspective. So I was at a few years ago, I was at a lunch or breakfast, actually, for local legislators here in Maryland, where I live. And there was an upsurge of anti-Semitism in some of the public schools. And so we asked the lieutenant governor, who happens to be African-American, we asked him, what's your response to that? And he gave a response I did not expect. I expected it was like a softball question that I thought I asked him for him to be able to say, I think anti-Semitism is terrible. What he said is, well, I face that every day as a Black American. It's not that you would think that maybe it's like underground or disappeared, but the fact is, like, racism is a part of American life. Anti-Semitism is a part of American life. We shouldn't pretend otherwise. He wasn't saying that to say, like, I'm minimizing anti-Semitism. He was saying, like, these are real issues that have not disappeared. And actually, in many of my readings of Zionism, I actually think that the Zionist promise was that it would be a cure to anti-Semitism. That when we normalized our relationship as a Jewish people, as one of the nations of the world, we would become a light unto the nations, we would become respected, and in fact, it could be the cure to anti-Semitism. Of course, there are other strains of Zionism that talk about just the fact that we would have power and be able to fight back against anti-Semitism. Both are true, elu ve'elu. And I think we're being challenged on all sides. We're being challenged by the idealism of Zionism when it meets the reality of having power and sovereignty and having to figure out the messiness of politics. I think it's being challenged because, in fact, anti-Semitism isn't going anywhere. It's like all forms of bias and hatred and bigotry. They were a part of the human condition that we constantly have to push back against. And it's exhausting. It's expensive and it's exhausting and it's hard and it's dispiriting. And it also helps us become a stronger people. And unfortunately, for better or worse, and I, as a rabbi, am constantly frustrated by the fact that people are pushed towards Judaism and the Jewish people more by anti-Semitism than by the beauty of our tradition itself. So, of course, it's an opportunity because we want people, I know I want myself to be drawn towards the beautiful beliefs, traditions, practices, values, history, literature, and text that that really animates Jewish life. So we have an opportunity to do that, but it's frustrating that people are pushed more than they are pulled, I guess is what I would say. But that's our condition. So I think that, as we've talked about, there is a surge of interest in Jewish life and Jewish connection. And I think there's an opportunity here. And like that bar mitzvah student from this past week, in some ways, it is waking people up to their Jewish identity. It's waking up some of our neighbors to the fact that anti-Semitism still exists. And thank God they are actually responding as partners and caring friends. And I would just remind us that this is, in my opinion, not 1933. We are protected by the police. Our governments have stated very strongly, certainly here in the United States, their commitment to Israel and to the Jewish people. I was at the White House yesterday on the first anniversary of the release of President Biden's plan to counter anti-Semitism. It's a really powerful plan that's mobilizing government in lots of different ways. That is not 1933. So there are extremists. There are all sorts of people who hate us, but we also do have allies and partners, and we are not alone in this struggle. And there are good people who are pushing back against all forms of bias and hatred, including anti-Semitism, who are there with us.
Yael, Rabbi Splansky, your thoughts?
Yes, I'll start by admitting that for most of my rabbinate, I was not particularly interested in making combating anti-Semitism part of my portfolio. It just was not particularly compelling and certainly not uplifting in any way, not joyful. I would say up until the Pittsburgh shooting, whenever a congregant would say to me, oh, sometimes they would say, we need an anti-Semitism committee. And that's not what they meant. They meant we need a committee to combat anti-Semitism. But to be honest, it just wasn't my thing. And of course, I'm a student of history in general, of Jewish history in particular. And so I know that it's a fact of history. But I also admit that I was surprised just how swiftly anti-Semitism has been unleashed in the West in general. And I believe we were really unprepared, that we're still reeling and trying to find our footing, even with all the organizations that already exist for the purpose almost singular purpose of combating anti-Semitism. So unfortunately, I can't now focus all of my energy on what is called Judeo-optimism and Jewish joy. Judeo-pessimism is appropriate now. It is necessary. It probably is a healthy response. So I have seen now since October 7th that my job has changed significantly. Probably, I reported to my board, I think probably 80% of my work is changed now. And I've been to Israel twice, and I meet often with elected officials, sometimes at their invitation, sometimes at my prodding. And I never really made that my business before, but I know that it is now to advocate on behalf of the Jewish community and on behalf of Israel. And I have learned from people who live in that advocacy activism space that there is something about faith leaders of all stripes that can open doors to elected officials where otherwise those doors might be closed. And so I now have come to appreciate and embrace this responsibility. What has come from that is bringing it to the next tiers of the congregation in the form of an advocacy committee, not an anti-Semitism committee, but an advocacy committee made up of very serious strategic thinkers. And I hope that it will become a model for many other congregations because we do need to get organized. We do need to get mobilized. We do need to get smart and join, not to duplicate the work of the professional organizations that are all about combating anti-Semitism, but rather to create a grassroots partnership with them, a grassroots complement to what they do. Because I have learned in community organizing, there are things that can happen on a grassroots level that cannot happen from the top down. So that has also now become more and more a focus of my work. I will say, really through conversations with my grown kids and with my husband, who's also on campus, a professor, that you need to ask a couple of questions, open-ended, simple questions, to find out if the person in front of you is someone you can talk to or someone you can't talk to. And once you realize that this is someone that you can talk to, you should talk to them and really sit with them, and that you actually can help move people and open their minds and open their hearts and open their understanding. And I think we need to redouble that work. And then, of course, there is the minority of people that you cannot talk to, and I don't think we should waste any time or energy on them. That's just beyond me, right? You know, once you realize someone is a racist, there's no talking to them. The conversation is closed, and save your breath. But most people are either ill-informed or deliberately misled, but do want to get it right. And I think those are the folks that we need to spend more and more time with. Thank you.
Rabbi Hirsch?
I would just, well, number one, agree with Rabbi Blumenthal that it's not the 1930s. America was always different in this regard from the kind of state-sponsored anti-Semitism we've seen in other parts of Europe and the world. So while we've seen a dramatic surge in anti-Semitic actions that are affecting everybody, every Jew, mentally, as well as they see it on the streets of New York. They're on the way to work and they run into protests where very antagonistic and hostile things are said. So it obviously affects them, and it affects them. It came out of the blue. It was like a thunderclap from a clear sky. Not that it wasn't always there, but our people preferred not to dwell on its presence right underneath the surface. So it's obviously affected people, but we've had terrific partnership and cooperation with local security agencies, state security agencies, and federal security agencies. So we have accepted support from them as well. I remember when I was at the URJ, when I was at ARTSA 20 years ago, we used to debate, and essentially most of us agreed that we would not take government funding. That was something that churches were doing, or advocating for, but we weren't going to take it because of the separation of church and state, and that was the liberal position, and we almost all of us agreed with that. COVID changed that for us. I don't know if we would have emerged as healthy as, well, I know we wouldn't have emerged as healthy as we did had we not accepted government money, and we cannot sustain the level of security that we need without the government support, and the government realizes that. And so there's very deep cooperation and a very real awareness on the part of the government and local authorities that anti-Semitism is not simply a Jewish problem, it's a problem for everybody. And if it festers, it eventually will damage everybody. I would add one more thing, maybe, again, to take this in a slightly different or new direction. I believe that long-term, our challenge is also ideological and philosophical. Personally, this is for me personally, and this is something that we're having a conference here, Recharging Reform Judaism conference in New York in 2 weeks, and we'll be devoting some of our time and a lot of our focus to the issue which I referred to a while ago. I personally believe that part of what's driving the anti-Semitism in the form of anti-Zionism and straight out hostility towards Jews is the emergence on a broad level of identity politics. I think identity politics, that is the effort to restore broken systems that are either you're either a racist or an anti-racist. There's nothing in the middle. And by the way, anti-racism is basically, the argument is anti-racism is what I tell you because I'm of color and you're not. The departure from these concepts that ensured and secured not only the safety, but the well-being of American Jewry, and accounts for our success in this country, in the United States. Meritocracy, reason, evidence, science, debate, free speech, that the shift from that to a form of judging people by their group identity, their innate qualities, their race, their religion, their background, will always harm the Jewish community. Because at the end of the day, when you create this moral divide between the right group to belong to and the wrong group to belong to, the Jews will always find themselves on the wrong side of the moral equation. And so long-term, since I believe that that is a significant driver of anti-Semitism, we're going to have to come to grips with what our comfort level is with respect to this ideology, which is so pervasive now in American society, and in particular in elite institutions. And the elite institutions are the ones that define in many ways the policies and the morality of the national culture.
And do you mind if I break in for a second?
By all means, I
follow
want to
up
go
on
to
that
some of
and
the
create a
questions
little
that
bit of a
people have raised.
conversation here. Because I think that I don't, I know from your writings that, we're in agreement here. And how do we do that while still fighting racism, fighting all sorts of other bigotry and prejudice, right? In other words, like, what concerns me also is that I hear voices within our community who are saying that fight against racism has turned against us, and therefore maybe that's not our space. But in general, I still hold to a commitment, a liberal commitment, that all forms of racism and prejudice are detrimental to the Jewish people. What has happened is that our culture of polarization and binary thinking has infected all sorts of political spaces, from right to left, and especially in the extremes. And it's why our movements, that I do believe create actually a center. Certainly, that's how I know I tend to position the conservative Masorti movement, and I believe that in general that's the case for the Reform movement as well. How do we create in our space of liberal Judaism an understanding that actually the world is about moderation, a term that you use, Rabbi Hirsch, a lot, moderation, nuance, dialogue, and careful thinking. I think that the concern around issues of systemic bias are real. They are real parts. I do buy into that idea. But the binaries around that there are no allies, if you have a certain color of skin or a certain set of relationships, or spaces in which you seem to belong. Jews are actually the proof that kind of thinking doesn't work. And it's why there is such a strong reaction to the Jewish people, because we don't fit into those spaces. We are a people, and we are a religion. We have people who are of color, and we have people who, have white European backgrounds. We are a mixed set of people who are very prosperous, and also people who are very much in need. So we ourselves, as is usually the case, don't fit into any of the categories that the world creates and wants to fit us into. And I actually think we need to be proud of that. And we need to figure out how to use that as leverage to be able to again, be a voice in the world that pushes back against these things. I am very concerned about some of the trends that I'm hearing, which are that in the betrayal that we feel, in the alliances that we created to fight against these forms of bias and prejudice, in that betrayal, we will actually reject the work that we do feel called to do by our deepest Jewish values.
Thank you. I'm going to go to some of the questions that have been coming on the side and try to consolidate them. We had a question about the encampments and the arrangements. I will say, as a graduate of Northwestern University, that the president, Michael Shield, developed the arrangements at Harvard, the arrangements elsewhere. How do we deal with the young people who are there, and how do we harness and learn from the Jews who have, as you pointed out, Rabbi Hirsch, stepped up on campus, professors as well as students, to say, lo zo haderech, this isn't the way. How do we, and now as a synagogue, keeping in mind what Rabbi Blumenthal just said, how do synagogues that have a commitment to liberal social values and a devotion to Israel equally express a relationship, though that relationship, when they're not happy with the government of Israel, where they're not happy with the political parties of Israel? So we're dealing with it both internally in the United States and in Canada, but also how do we relate to Israel on those values that are in conflict at the same time? Any of you?
Well, I'll kick it off.
Please.
Not long after October 7th, I'm on some rabbinic advisory board for Hillel, Ontario. And our colleague Rabbi Seth Goren is doing tremendous work there, and a lot of heavy lifting, as are all Hillel professionals, and God bless them. I remember he said, our job at Hillel is to keep Jewish students on campus healthy and safe. And my heart dropped. And I thought, that is not Hillel's job. That's the job of campus security and psychological services and the health clinic. And there are a whole army of people lined up to keep students healthy and safe. And yet he knew his business. He knew exactly what he was saying, that has become their job. So I think it's the right thing to work hard to fill the gap for a time. And then it's the right thing to push it back where it belongs. And I think we're seeing a shift now in many corners of this conversation where Jews and Jewish leadership in their workplaces, in their children's schools, and yes, on campuses too, are starting to become braver in articulating, this is for you to fix. I will help you. I will inform you. I will even help to fund, right? If that's appropriate. But this is your job. And I think what synagogues are doing now is buoying our people to go and do that kind of work wherever they have a place. I can point to a number of examples in my own congregation. A lawyer is taking on that case. You know, remember at the rally in Ottawa when the Toronto buses were no-show, right? And there's now a case against that busing company. So he's taken that on. Another congregant in the arts community has become a lightning rod, and she's just stepping up to it and carrying it. We have Pride Shabbat coming up to support the LGBTQ members of our congregation, who are also taking really hard hits in their circles, and on and on. So I think synagogues have a very important role to play through prayer, through study, through relationship, through modeling, that each of us can be brave. Just look at how our Israeli brothers and sisters are so brave, siblings are so brave. If they can be courageous like that, then we can be courageous here and each play our part.
Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Blumenthal, you want to add to that?
Look, I would just say very often we have qualities in us that we discover we never really knew we had, or we didn't have at this level, that are brought out through adversity, through the crucible, through the test. And I think we have the potential, and I think this is going to happen, that through this difficult period, we will discover qualities about ourselves and about our community that will serve us well in the years to come. We will produce a whole cadre of new leaders. This moment will eventually produce greater clarity about what we believe, who's with us, and who is we still need to work towards and work on. For example, I was part of this interfaith group that I mentioned before for years and years, and they were all over us when it came to the Pittsburgh massacre. They sincerely felt it at the core of their being, and there was just absolute silence after October 7th when 100 times more people were massacred. So you know, it's all these are clarifying moments for us. It doesn't mean that we should abandon interfaith conversations. What it means is, you know, we didn't assess everything properly, and we assumed certain things that turned out to be either false or not complete. So I think in the end, this will produce, this will have positive results, as is often the case in adverse times. And being in and part of the struggle is what gives spice to life. It is what gives interest and meaning and purpose. And I think a lot of people will find that in themselves, and we as a community will find that.
So let me
okay.
add something that you might address. So how do we help our people respond to the charge that Zionism is white colonial settler imperialism, and that, or even that non-Zionism, not anti-Zionism, is a valid part of Jewish life and expression? I've spoken about this a lot. I've written about this, but I'm curious to hear from you. How do we help them? And we only have 4 minutes.
Do that in 4 minutes.
Right.
So first of all, I would say, again, part of the issue is that Judaism and the Jewish people defy all categories. So it is unusual for a people to have an ancient and ongoing relationship with the land and then return from the 4 corners of the earth to that land to fulfill a destiny that we have spoken about and lived for over 2,000 years. That is an unusual and strange story. And also, how do we do that while honoring the fact that there are other people who also live in that land and have lived there for many centuries? So what does that look like? It defies all categories. It is not about colonialism. It's not about being white, since all one has to do is ride a bus in Israel to discover that people literally came from all 4 corners of the world. So it is not about race. It is about peoplehood. And Judaism is unique. In most spaces in North America, people think about Judaism as a religion. What does it mean that we are not just a religion, but also a people and, in fact, a nation in which we define ourselves? And by the way, in that space of like how we talk, where people talk about those kinds of things, a lot of it is the ability for people to be able to define for themselves. Why will we be denied the ability to define for ourselves who we are as not only a religion, but a people, a nation with distinct features that match all other nations, a unique language, a unique place in geographic space. So that is language that we do need to introduce, and it's unfortunately a polemic that needs to be revisited and constantly talked about. And then we need to, introduce complexity and nuance in what is often a polar conversation. So within our own space also, right? Because what the goals are, there are lots of different Zionisms. One cannot say there's only one Judaism. Judaism believes, Judaism says. There are also a lot of different Zionisms. We have whole books, readers of those different ideas. And I would just say that non-Zionism was certainly a voice that we heard before 1948, actually very prominently in the Reform movement. History, I believe, has proven that that is not the right strategy for the Jews. I don't think anybody wants to go back to 1933. Despite the fact that in some ways the state of Israel failed on October 7th, I do not take that personally as meaning that the entire Zionist and Israeli experiment has failed. It means we have work to do. And I'm an eternal optimist. I think that's our chief job as rabbis, is to be chief optimism officers. I say we're COOs, and I do believe that we can make those things, that we can adapt to this moment in terms of the deep questions that we've been asking today.
Yael, Ami, 30 seconds each.
30 seconds. I will say, I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful. It's likely going to get harder to be a liberal Jew in the diaspora, and we have to prepare for that. But I am in every way hopeful and confident that we will continue to survive and to thrive.
That's for sure. I say amen to that, and I would add that I think as we need to find new ways of Jewish expression, philosophically, theologically, ritually, but also in terms of our communal interactions as well. And what I advise our congregants is
I want to
ethics.
thank the three of you for your contribution to this dialogue. It's recorded. We'll try to encourage people to watch the recording. There's a lot of stimulating ideas that you've mentioned that I hope others will pick up on. We are looking for hope. And with that, I'm going to turn to Cantor Green to lead Hatikva. We'll conclude with that. It's been Yom HaAtzmaut. And those of you who are watching at home and want to stand for Hatikva, you're certainly encouraged to do so.
Thank you.
Cantor.
You're muted. Rav Baruch, you're muted.
Thank you for tuning in, everyone, and watch for the circulation of the recording. Have a good evening. Shalom.